until the time of Saladin. And it becomes the more important from Saladin on, because in a sense, Saladin's victory is read as the victory of Islam once again. We were on the ropes, right? Think of it like one of those Rocky movies where he's getting beaten up for 15 rounds, and then finally he comes out and bang, and he knocks Apollo Creed to the ground. That's what Saladin was. And the successful taking of Jerusalem is the symbolic act that confirms and legitimates universal Islam. Now, I wanted to say, how much more time do I have? 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? Okay.
Class goes till 12:20.
Oh, it does? Oh, okay. I'll be done by 12:15. I saw that, and I mentioned before, the events of 1099, when the Crusaders, after 4 years of extraordinary challenge and disasters happening and all sorts of terrible, terrible things being committed by them, they finally take Jerusalem in 1099. And all of the sources that we have, on your website you have Ramon d'Aguillier and Fulker of Chartres. There are all kinds of chronicle sources that describe the conquest of Jerusalem and the sacking of it. And they depict a brutal, horrible, almost psychotic wave of violence, where we're told that for 3 days, these soldiers went on an absolutely unchecked rampage, and they killed, and they slaughtered, and they raped, and they despoiled, and they burnt, building after building, and it went on, and it was so terrible that there was so much blood in the streets that if you tried to cross the street, you were wading in blood up to your ankles. It's an unforgettable scene to read this. I remember the first time I read it, I was actually an undergrad, so I was cheating. I was reading the translation. But it sounded familiar. I said, first of all, I thought, oh, what a horrible scene of despoilage and atrocity. But it sounded familiar. Because I had previously read a history of the Persian conquest of Jerusalem in
614.
614, thank you. Edit the tape to make it sound like I got the date right.
Okay.
And according to a Byzantine chronicler, right, because the Byzantines at that time were in control of the church when the Persians came in and took it. According to the Byzantine chronicler of the time, after they took the city of Jerusalem, for 3 days, the soldiers went on a rampage of crazy violence, killing, raping, pillaging, burning, destroying homes. And there was so much blood spilled that when you walked across the street, you were soaked in blood up to your ankles. So that got me going. And so I kept. Jerusalem's been conquered a lot of times, I must say. The locus classicus, the most famous of all destructions or attacks upon the city, of course, is the Roman assault in 70 CE, and the one that's told by Josephus. When the Romans decide to come in, they put down the Jewish revolt and they scatter the Jews into the diaspora and they destroy the temple. If you ever get a chance, if you haven't read it, read Josephus's history. He's a very good writer, and he knows how to build up the drama. And his description of the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, it goes on and on and on. It's like Tolstoy's Battle of Borodino, which fills 9 chapters of War and Peace, just the battle scene. His description is unforgettable, and that's part of my point. When medieval writers, well, it's not even medieval, it goes back to ancient times. When people were writing history in the ancient and medieval worlds, they thought of themselves as writing a kind of literature. And what you want is, you want to be accurate, of course, but you also want to produce a work of literature. So, for example, we know that if you've read, say, Thucydides, his history of the Peloponnesian Wars, Thucydides invents things like crazy. things like Pericles' funeral oration, right? If you know this is famous speech that Pericles gave. Pericles never said anything like that. He may not have even given a speech at that particular funeral. But what Thucydides wanted is to put in Pericles' mouth what Pericles should have said. And it's an effort to show Thucydides' own rhetorical skill. These are set pieces to show off your writing ability. And you do the same thing with descriptions of battle scenes. The destruction of Jerusalem taking 3 days and being filled with endless violence is clearly a literary trope. And after the First Crusade, we find that this trope works its way back to the rest of medieval Europe. When let's say, at the Battle of Bouvines in France in 1215, guess what happened? It took the city for 3 days, the soldiers went on, and no one was in control, and there's blood up to your ankles. When the Normans took London, right, during the coronation of William the Conqueror, the Normans went crazy, the townspeople were smashing things, and there was 3 days of rampant violence.
Does literary trope, though, does that mean they're copying from each other? Or it's out, were they aware of it?
Oh, sure. I think what's happening is every person who's writing a description of a sacking of a city knows that the reader, any reader of this text has in the back of their mind, Josephus. How can I write something that is as good as that? So I'm not denying that there was a horrible, horrible massacre in the city of Jerusalem. I believe it. I certainly can believe it. I'm just saying that it's hard to understand. It's hard to say exactly what happened. Was it as bad as the chroniclers are saying that it was, or is this a case of braggadocio, of the conqueror? Because after all, it's the conquerors who talk about the terrible things that they did to the city once they took control of it. In none of the contemporary Islamic chronicles, even the ones that do mention the fact that the Christians took Jerusalem, all they say is the Christians took Jerusalem. And they don't refer to any horrible massacre. They don't refer to any mass slaughter. Neither do the Jews. Now that's an even tougher one, a tougher nut to crack, because I don't have an explanation for it. Maybe Michael does. But for some reason, in the Middle Ages, the Jews are the only literate people who never wrote history. There are no Jewish histories written in the Middle Ages. They wrote lots of other things. They wrote lots of legal books and medical books and some philosophical books and all kinds of stuff. But history as a genre just clearly didn't interest them. When there was a unique and horrible act of persecution, such as the mass pogroms in the Rhine River Valley that just prefigured the First Crusade, people wrote memoirs of what had happened. Presumably, if that had happened in Jerusalem, someone would have written it. Now, it's possible that they did, and the texts just don't survive. But just as the Crusades aren't the great and glorious and romantic adventure that the Western writers wanted, and down to today still want to portray the Crusades as, so too are they not. At least they're not the horrible crime that they are recalled to be in 20th century Muslim writing. The truth is somewhere in between, and there's a lot of room for interpretation, but it's really, really fascinating. So I encourage you to take a look at the Prower book. If you can afford it, get the Hill and Brand book. Send her a note. Tell her I think her book is great, and maybe she'll send me another copy for free, because this one's getting a bit old. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking beforehand about how when they had the Crusader states, they only had 300 Crusaders there. What exactly did Urban have an action? Does he have a plan? Did he have a plan once they captured Jerusalem, like what they were going to do with it? Because you said that basically everybody pretty much just packed up and left.
Oh,
So
yeah.
was it just like, okay, we're gonna free them, then we're gonna go back, or did he did he realize that had they all left, they were gonna come back in? I mean, what was going on?
If there was a plan, he left no written record of it. We know that when the Crusaders, they worked their way across Europe and they stopped in Constantinople, they negotiated with the Byzantine emperor, who agreed to help them because he needed help against the Turks. He said, I will help you if, when you are successful, if you agree to hold these lands in fief from me, in order to add this territory, to restore this territory to Byzantine control. The Crusaders said yes. Now, they were lying through their teeth, but they said yes. So if there was a plan at all, it was to hold these things as a Byzantine fief. In reality, they never did. Officially, they placed themselves under the feudal overlordship of the Pope. But that's purely symbolic. In terms of just day-to-day actually governing the place, they were completely autonomous. Yeah. The Pope's never really, I suspect that Urban never really thought it through. I think he just thought, well, if we just go in and kill enough people, everything will be okay, and then we can leave. We've lived through that in our own last decade. Any other questions?
In the course of your talking today, you referred to yourself as a historian who likes to see, I believe you might have said something like linear relationships, or does that mean that you really believe that history proceeds linearly, or you would just kind of like that if it were the case? Or tell us more about your background.
Oh, boy. Well, I'm really just a frustrated baseball player. It's purely accident that I'm here. No, I like to lay things out linearly because it helps me to understand them. But I recognize that I'm imposing a kind of structure on what's happening. I'm not a believer in historical inevitability, for example. And so A can cause B, which can cause C, which can cause D, but that doesn't mean that it's predetermined A, B, C, D. This is the way it worked out. But what I found in doing this book of mine immensely helpful, and from the comments I got from the reviewers that they'd sent the manuscript out, I'd done something as simple as every time I mentioned a Muslim person, I put in parentheses, A if they were Arab, T if they were Turkish, K if they were Kurdish, P if they were Persian. And when one does something as simple as that, it's like getting a completely different prescription of glasses, and you suddenly can just see things that you didn't see before. So at least I saw it, and I hope others will too.